A portion of this video is sponsored by MailChimp. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has been out for a few months, and now that the honeymoon phase has worn off, let's talk about how the phone stacks up to the other iPhones and what many people are just simply getting wrong about this phone. Let's start with one of the biggest changes, the always-on display. We were all hyped for this feature. It was something that we've longed for years on an iPhone, and when Apple announced it for the 14 Pro and Pro Max, it received, well, mixed reactions, and that was because this always-on display wasn't really an always-on display. It was more like a dimly lit lock screen. It wasn't until iOS 16.2 where the always-on display became what it should have been from the start, where we can disable the wallpaper and the notifications to get more of a real always-on display where we don't have the distractions. We can just simply see our date and time. Oh, and not to mention, it also gives us better battery life. Now, before we discuss the issue I have with the display, let's take a moment to catch you up on MailChimp because they are sponsoring this portion of the video. So MailChimp is the #1 email marketing and automation platform with over 12 million customers who send more than 500 million emails every day. Their advanced AI analyzes the data from these billions of emails to offer personalized recommendations that will help you or your business improve engagement and revenue. Whether you're a creator, a business owner, or if you just want to start sending a newsletter about whatever your passion is, MailChimp gives you the tools and the ability to take that mailing list to the next level. As a matter of fact, I'm setting up an email campaign right now for my next wallpaper collection, and I also made a simple sign-up form to collect emails through MailChimp, which, hint hint, if you want to get the exclusive wallpaper, you might want to sign up for that newsletter linked in the description below. And thanks to the Journey Builder automations, I will be able to segment you guys based on what wallpaper collections you buy. That way I can send you more specific emails. So if you want to check all of this out for yourself, you can get started at MailChimp.com. Thanks to MailChimp for sponsoring this portion of the video. Thanks to the excellent 6.7-inch OLED display, you can see the time on that always-on display from a really good distance away. The biggest perk of this display is that it goes all the way up to 2000 nits of max brightness. Now, it only gets that high when you have auto brightness enabled and you're in direct sunlight, but that's been the scenario for me multiple times, more times than I can count since using this phone, and I'm able to see everything perfectly. I mean, I really have no complaints about the brightness when I'm outside. It also does not dim as much as previous iPhones when it's under direct sunlight and under more duress and heat. But if you're not outside often and you just live in a more, gloomy, rainy area, you're not going to notice a big difference unless you're watching HDR videos. So, HDR videos, you will see a big improvement over the 13 and 12 Pro Max because you do have a 400 nit improvement there. I will say though, sometimes that bright display is not a good thing. Like for example, at night, almost every night it seems, I have to turn on reduce white point since my eyes are so sensitive to light, and even at the lowest brightness, this phone is just simply still too bright. Perhaps an even more important change than the always-on display, the 14 Pro Max also has the highly debated dynamic island at the top of the screen, which replaces the notch. Now, I love this feature from the very beginning, and now after a few months, I love it even more. And the reason being is because #1, I never even notice it when I'm using my phone on a daily basis. Like when I'm texting, when I'm browsing social media, watching videos, I never notice it. Now, that's nothing new. I felt the same about the notch. I eventually got over the notch because I just simply started to ignore it and not even see it. But the #2 reason I love the dynamic island so much more now is because I just find it to be a very useful way to access certain information without taking up as much real estate or having to open up another application. And now a lot of third-party applications also have support for dynamic island and the live activities. For example, live sports scores. I love being able to follow NBA or NFL games straight from the dynamic island while I'm actively using other applications. And there's other apps like Flighty or Apollo to see my flight details or follow a thread on Reddit, which I find to be very useful. So there's other scenarios too, like active phone calls. When your music is currently playing, it's nice to be able to go forward and back in the song without having to go into the control center. And there's just so much more that the dynamic island is really great for. I just find this feature to be much more useful than people give it credit for. And, most people who haven't used this iPhone, the iPhone 14 Pro series, are the ones who see it as a gimmick and like a joke, which I can see on the surface, but it is honestly far from a gimmick when it saves you time and it gives you access to information that you just simply could not have accessed while in other applications before. The natural follow-up question after talking about a feature that runs an activity in the background is, well, doesn't it affect battery life? And the answer is it does, but not enough to make you not want to use the feature. So I will say that early on in like iOS 16 all the way through iOS 16.1, it did eat up a decent chunk of battery when using third-party live activities. But now after the iOS 16.2 update and Apple refining this feature even more, it does not negatively affect the battery life nearly as much anymore. And overall, battery life on the 14 Pro Max has been outstanding. I mean, it didn't quite live up to the sky-high expectations when it was first launched, but after several software improvements, it has been an absolute beast. So I still use the 14 Pro as my main device, but when I did use the Pro Max as my main device for a couple of weeks, the difference was noticeable pretty much every single day. So this phone has no issue getting through an entire day on one charge. Charge it overnight, and you'll likely not need to charge it again until you're getting ready for bed the next night. That is, unless you are just on social media and wasting time on your phone all day, because in that instance, which guilty, I've been there, you're probably going to need a charge after like 5 or 6 hours or so. Which pro tip, by the way, if you have days like that, just go to screen time and set up some app limits. That way you're only in certain applications for a set amount of time. It really helps you stay on track. And one last thing I'll say about battery life is basically the tasks that I found eat up the most battery life are streaming YouTube videos, specifically while on cellular instead of Wi-Fi, taking videos for prolonged periods of time, especially if you use something like the action mode, or if you shoot in ProRes, or if you just shoot photos in RAW. But when it comes to gaming, browsing social media, responding to emails, things that you do on a daily basis, I found that the battery life was not impacted nearly as much as it was on previous iPhones. Now, the chip that's powering the iPhone 14 Pro Max is the A16 Bionic, and it has pretty much the same specs in terms of CPU, GPU, and the neural engine as the 13 Pro Max. The only difference, of course, is A15 versus A16. So, if you put the 14 Pro Max and the 13 Pro Max side by side, the 14 Pro Max will be quicker, but it's going to be very, very close. And when you use these phones on a daily basis, just doing your normal tasks, you're probably not going to notice a difference at all going from the 13 Pro Max to the 14 Pro Max. I found that the main difference comes from the improved thermals in the 14 Pro Max, which of course leads to less heat, which leads to less battery strain and less lag overall. But aside from that, if you're not running the phone into the dirt, going down on 1% battery life, again, you're not going to see a big difference from the 13 Pro Max to the 14 Pro Max. I think the ones that are going to see the biggest improvement performance-wise are those on the regular iPhone 11 and earlier. So if you're thinking about upgrading and performance is your number one thing you want to upgrade for, don't even think about it unless you have a regular iPhone 11 or earlier. Otherwise, you might be disappointed. Now, I saved the best for last because the camera on the 14 Pro Max is just downright incredible. But straight out of the box, it's going to seem pretty similar to the 13 Pro Max. It's not until you enable ProRAW when you unlock this phone's secret weapon, 48 megapixel still shots compared to the default 12 megapixel. These photos not only retain much more detail and dynamic range, but they're also a much better blank canvas for editing in post. Anytime I go to take an important photo for social media or for something I'm going to want to look back on, I always tap on that RAW button up in the top right corner, make sure there's no cross through it. That way I know I'm in RAW and I shoot away. And while it does take up 3 times as much storage as traditional, 12 megapixel photos, it is well worth it because you can see the difference. Even after uploading to social media, you can see the difference from RAW versus regular 12 megapixel photos. So you just have to be sure to go into the RAW folder in your Photos app from time to time and delete the unnecessary RAW shots or the duplicates, because they do take up a lot of storage. And if you don't shoot every photo in RAW like I don't, a pro tip here is to go into the preserved setting for Pro RAW and turn that off so that you don't accidentally take future photos in that format. And of course, they will eat up a lot of storage. Another area where the 14 Pro Max shines, even over the 13 Pro Max, is with low light photography and macro shots. And that's thanks in part to the bigger sensor, but also thanks to the A16 chip and the photonic engine. I've been especially impressed with the macro shot shots on this phone, and having that toggle there in the camera app is a must so that you can always disable it when you want. But I just found that these photos show even more detail than they did on the 13 Pro Max, which blew my mind when it first came out. When it comes to video, we finally get cinematic mode in 4K, so I've used that a handful of times and it's worked out pretty well. And we also get action mode. If you go to video over here, you will see the little guy running up in the top right. That is action mode, and you will see it does decrease the quality because it does have to kind of zoom in to reduce all of that motion. So this is cool. It definitely seems like your phone is actually on a gimbal, and it's great for those action shots. I haven't really had a use case for this yet, and I don't know if I ever will, but it is cool to have there for those who take action shots on their iPhone. But aside from cinematic mode and action mode, the video is just top notch. I mean, there's not a smartphone on the market that does it better than the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So if you're looking to take videos with your iPhone, you're not going to find anything better out there, especially if you shoot in ProRes. Now, just like shooting photos in RAW, shooting videos in ProRes is going to take up a ton of storage, so just keep that in mind. So, is the iPhone 14 Pro Max worth buying? And as always, that is a loaded question, and it depends on a few personal preferences. So if you care the most about the camera and the video quality, I say yes, even if you have a 13 Pro Max. You know, that larger sensor, the 48 megapixel Pro RAW shots, and the improved low light performance make a big difference when you take lots of photos and lots of videos, and you will notice a difference pretty quickly. But if you are not a big photo or video taker, if it's just not your main focus, you likely won't see as much value in the 14 Pro or Pro Max if you have an iPhone 12 or 13 Pro Max. So, you know, if you have an iPhone 11 Pro Max or something older, I think the 14 Pro Max will be a must upgrade for many different reasons, including the camera improvements, the battery life, the display, the performance. Pretty much everything important will be noticeably improved if you're coming from the 11 Pro Max or earlier. However, as a counter, I do think that there are better values on the market right now. So if you're not able to comfortably afford the 14 Pro Max, don't buy it. Don't stretch yourself out. Go grab an iPhone 12 Pro Max or even a regular iPhone 13 for hundreds of dollars less. But if you want the best of the best and the cost is not your biggest concern, if this is an investment, the 14 Pro Max is the iPhone to buy, and one that will last you for a long, long time. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe for more reviews just like this one. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.